Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, NCAA tournament is underway by the time that people are listening to this. By the way, we're actually recording this on Wednesday afternoon because I'll be doing tournament coverage all day on our normal record day of Thursday. So we're doing this a bit early. We have a lot to get to. All Bang the Drum team is coming today. No interview because of how long All Bang the Drum team takes to be able to get through. We will do jersey contests. I'm currently repping a certain Phoenix Suns player, and I may or may not have just gone full Jonah Hill on everybody. I promise this jersey is not tucked in. It does actually have a name on it. And
I pulled up and I was like, "Oh man, we're going full Jonah Hill today." I like the vibes. That's a sick jersey. That's the thing. They go, no undershirt, let the guns breathe a little bit. Starting to warm up in Florida. I feel it, man.
Did shoulder day today to get ready for it. Just doing what I can. Didn't help very much, but we're doing what we can. So yeah, we have a ton to get to. But before we do all of that stuff, we had news right before we came on that the SEC is sticking with the 8-game conference schedule for 2025, which wasn't necessarily a stunner, but it was kind of one of those, all right, I guess we're still kicking the can on this. As somebody who wants the 9-game conference schedule, as somebody that is looking forward to that, it was one of those headlines that you see and you're like, when I think it was Seth Emerson who first reported it, and then like 5 minutes later the news came out, you're like, all right, I get it, but it's still not something that I'm particularly crazy about.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing, is that just like there is nothing kind of sacred left, right? Except for the SEC to SEC spring transfer window. Every other rule is kind of just up for interpretation. So that's the thing. I think that the big, it was kind of the Texas Oklahoma move. It was the California schools moving to the Big Ten playoff expansion. After that, I was like, okay, yeah, we'll just play this game on Mars then. That's cool. After this, you can't scare me.
Yeah, look, I get it. There's a lot of moving pieces in college football. And I've always said that this comes back to the playoff, and that's what the SEC is going to base its conference schedule on. Mm-hmm. The thing that probably forced them to want to kick the can was twofold. It was, well, it's easier if you just flip the home games, which that's what they're going to be doing. The 2024 home games, those are your new home games, or those are your new road games for 2025 and vice versa. It's easier to do that. You don't have to worry about canceling all these non-conference games for all these teams in the SEC that have 4 non-conference games already booked up and having to break those contracts and do all that as well. But you don't have the financial incentive, and that, I think, is a holdup in a lot of this, not getting that extra deal from ESPN, that extra incentive, where ESPN said, no, we don't really have to give you more money just because you want to add another conference game. Having said that, I think in 2026 we're getting there. I really do, because if pay for play is coming, and if these contracts that you're going to have to be able to cut for your student athletes, if that's from having a lucrative media deal, then it would make more sense to want to bump that up and to do everything you possibly can to get that lucrative media deal. You can kind of start over with some of the scheduling and stuff, but you would have essentially had to try and cancel maybe some of these rivalry games that would have been on hiatus for a year. It just would have been strange. And it helps the SEC too now has the 3 automatic qualifiers for the playoff starting in 2026 for the 14-team playoff. Again, this is still about the path to the playoff. So I think all of those things kind of factored into it. I really hope we get there in 2026 as someone who just wants to see these teams in this mega conference play more, not like, oh, I want this team to have a tougher path to the playoff. I understand that, but I am also a fan of this sport that wants to see good teams play each other.
For sure. Let me ask for some clarity on something really quick. So what you're telling me is that in 2024, obviously the schedules are all set. 2025, we're going to take the conference games and just flip home and away.
Yes, the ones that we have for 2024, it's just going to be flipped. Not really any suspense about it, yeah.
So outside of some notable exceptions like the University of Florida, who plays a ton of hard out of conference games, you could more or less predict that your schedule difficulty in 2024 would about reflect it. AKA, no one's adding Alabama, adding a Vanderbilt.
Correct. The schedules are out. They're out.
The schedules are out, basically, right? And if you are, and hard to project this far, but if you are, let's say you're Scott Strickland specifically, it's like, hold on, we already signed up for all this stuff. So there might be a little bit of backroom dealing to get some of these non-conference games moved in ways that we've seen previously. Talking about the Georgia game we've looked at, some of them are COVID, so it's harder to bag that in. But the conference realignment specific games that were non-conference that kind of got moved around, I think we could see some more of that, because maybe these agreements were put in place. Usually they're put in place years ago, right? So like I said, if you're Scott Strickland and you had Miami, UCF, all these like harder teams, you might go, okay, hold on, let's string these out, move them. But outside of that, your schedule is your schedule for the next 2 years is where I'm getting to.
Yeah, nothing with the non-conference is changing. Like what you have set in place is in place. Those games aren't flipping all of a sudden. This is just strictly determined by the SEC schedule that you have in 2024 that's being turned around. So yeah, like from that standpoint, you can look at your schedule and kind of already, well, I mean, things change a lot. Things change a lot in this sport. And one day you can think that this game is a really difficult matchup. And I mean, crap, 2 weeks can go by in the fall and all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is way more difficult than we thought this was going to be. And that's just the way that things work. So it's probably, I mean, somebody is doing this as we speak who has the toughest 2025 schedule. Like that's happening. I'll refrain from doing just that. I mean, look, if I'm being 100% honest, is there probably a piece of content on SaturdayDownSouth.com at some point in the very near future that's going up like that? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, that's what we do. It's a long
Well, and you remember this with the COVID schedules, which is that, we can there are certain programs, right? Georgia's, your Alabama's, not exactly to say LSU's been there, right? Because they've had a couple of up and down years. But when you see that logo, you start to go, uh-oh, right? Texas is one that maybe has changed that a little bit. But, you have some teams at the bottom, and I think, we do pick on Vandy a little bit, but they do feel like they're about right there, that you start to say, okay, well, we can breathe a little bit of sigh. This team has gone a couple of years without winning a conference game. To your point, right in the middle there, which Texas are we getting? Are we getting Texas from 3 or 4 years ago? Are we getting Texas from last year? But all that to say, wherever you were, whatever was decided for you in 2024 was frozen there. So that's why I make the point about Florida, because we've talked about, and you will hear us talk about again, how difficult and almost unfair Florida's schedule is. So that's what I was talking about Scott Strickland. If you're Scott Strickland, you're like, uh-oh, we got another year of this. Whereas if you got a favorable schedule, I'm not going to go into his favorable schedule, you can look up and down everyone's schedule in the SEC with that many games and find some hard games. But if you were kind of, okay, this could have been worse, you've now doubled down. Wherever you were going into the season, you've doubled down. If you thought your slate was unfair, like Florida's, you got 2 years of it. If you thought yes, no?
I disagree. I think so much of Florida's schedule is about the non-conference. It's about the fact that they have to do this tour of Florida where they don't have this like two games that are just automatic wins. The fact that like UCF is now in a core 4 conference. Miami, say what you will, it's still Miami, and it's like it's a game that you can lose. You still have Florida State that has obviously a lot of talent, and Mike Norvell has done a remarkable job turning things around for himself. So I think so much of Florida in the way that we talk about the schedule is because of the non-conference portion of it.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that's entirely fair to say like, oh, automatically because we had this gauntlet in 2024, that's the case for 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because to your point, I'm just using because they're such a wild example, right? That's why we're talking Florida right now. But yeah, if you look at they have Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. So those are teams that pretty recently have been like, you're probably going to get a good team. So yeah, but to your point, when you take out Miami, UCF, FSU, and some of them will be there. That's what I'm saying. But that just the dates haven't been agreed to. It hasn't been final put on the thing. So I'm just saying a couple of things can move. But I think this is a great example of that, where it's like, are there some levers they can pull to make it easier? Maybe, but they are pretty much locked in. And it's just going to be very interesting when you think about coaching hires, when you think about recruiting, when you think about, what expectations are you setting? It's very interesting to see these guys twice in a row, especially if you do something. You see how many SEC coaches get chippy in these matchups to know you got to come back and go do it again. I actually think it's kind of cool. It's 2 years of normalcy in there.
Agreed. Florida's future non-conference schedule for 2025 is locked in. They have USF to start in that opener, which all of a sudden, you talk about games changing very quickly. USF with Alex Golesh looks a lot more difficult than we once thought. You have to go on the road to Miami, and then you have Florida A&M, which that's like your baked-in cupcake game. And then Florida State is still going to be that regular season finale that's locked in. So you can already look ahead and figure these things out because Florida has planned this out very, very far in advance. But yeah, it does make it so that we now, I feel like this will be the last year of this. I think it'll be the last year, but Who knows? I thought that before. I thought that we were going to go to the 9-game conference schedule in 2024 once Texas and Oklahoma joined, now that the playoff was expanded. That hasn't happened just yet. Hopefully, we'll see that in the very, very near future. And this isn't going to be some massive resistance, because I get it. This is what the SEC has done. But when you have more of that, you have more grace in the playoff system of the way that it's baked in, I would hope that we can get to that place. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll bang the drum team today. I think this is the 4th year that we've done this. The 4th year. If it's not the 4th, it's definitely the 3rd. And I didn't define the rules as well in the first year that we did this. So here's how this works. I get one player from every team to lead the bandwagon for. Mm-hmm. I basically will be the person that's saying, hey, like, this guy's better than you're making him out to be. I'm not saying that they're going to become All-Americans. Yeah, a little bit of this is who do I think is going to break out this year. But I more so am of the belief that these guys are better than they're getting credit for. And I don't think that there will be guys that you're hearing talked about enough when some of these preseason All-SEC teams start to come out and stuff like that. So sure. The rules, again, one player for each team. No quarterbacks, because if you're a quarterback, if you're good, I don't really need to bang the drum for you. You kind of, it's the SEC. All right. Be a little bit different if we're talking about the AAC or the Sun Belt or something like that, but we're not. This is big boy football, where being a quarterback's a little bit different. So also, you cannot be on the All Bang the Drum team if you were first team All SEC last year. Obviously, people have already banged the drum for you. You don't need me to do it. One more, no repeats. If I bang the drum for a player last year, they are either good enough to where I don't have to bang the drum for them again, or they aren't good enough and I don't want to bang the drum for them again. So pretty simple, right? Like nothing, yep. I don't need to explain any more than that. That makes sense.
Give me a percentage here, skill versus vibes. Are there some guys that are just lads that you like them?
Yeah, it's mostly skill. There are a couple of vibes. There are definitely a couple of vibes that I'm like, look, I know the numbers aren't there. You'll know the vibes, guys, when you hear them. How about that? That makes a little bit more sense. Okay, let's start. And I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. This isn't how much I like a particular player. This is just alphabetical order. So let's start with Alabama. Caden Proctor. No, I'm just kidding. If you saw the news on Tuesday, that Caden Proctor is doing the Michael Scott vasectomy, snip, snap, Alabama to Iowa, back to Alabama. I love an Instagram post wherein you say that I'm back, even though you left, but you didn't really leave. I don't know. Had an extended holiday break. I'm not talking about Caden Proctor. I was just bringing that up because I thought it was relevant. Jeremy Bernard is my all bang the drum team guy for Alabama. I think we can agree that the biggest question mark on this Alabama team is at receiver, right? Tons of turnover. You lose Bond, you lose Brooks, you lose Benson. Bernard is part of that turnover. And by the way, those are just portal guys, aside of including Jermaine Burton, who is off to the NFL. Bernard is a guy that is an import, not an export, which Alabama is going to have a whole lot of imports in this post-spring window. But for now, he was one of those guys they were able to get in that 30-day window. He is following Kalen DeBoer from Washington to Alabama. And as much as it stinks that Alabama had to deal with that 30-day window, this is someone who gets to step in, having the understanding of the offense. Obviously, he's been in that receiver room with Jamarcus Shepard, who's also coming over from Washington to Alabama. This guy was 4th in the pecking order and really the 5th option in that offense if you want to include Dylan Johnson. But you can do a lot of different things with him. And Washington fans were very excited about his potential in that offense and very bummed to see him leave. You can do the slot fades with him. You can have the between the hash drag routes to be able to stretch the defense, perhaps take advantage of getting him mismatched on a linebacker or something like that. You can line him up in the backfield, which Washington did 23 times last year. He's probably not, like, let's not say he's going to be the next great Bama receiver, because that's such an absurd standard to set for a human being. But there's a lot of upside, and Bama just needs guys that can get separation. They have struggled to have guys that do that consistently the last couple of years, after seemingly having everybody on the field that can do that before that. I think that he ends up being one of those guys who just steps in as a veteran pass catcher who makes an immediate impact, typically all bang the drum guys are not on their third school in as many years. That's not necessarily in the DNA of these guys, but you kind of realize the situation that he left after his freshman year at Michigan State. The coaching change at Washington makes a little bit more sense. I'll give him a little bit of grace with that. This guy's going to be an immediate playmaker, possibly the go-to target for Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, I think this is a great addition or a great place to start, which is that the offensive line, the receiver room are the two things in Alabama that you say, okay, this has been world class, the whole time here. Suddenly it's not so much, and how is DeBoer going to fix this? Talking about last year, I'm not saying anything about right now, but when you look at the flaws in Alabama's team last year that were like talent / position group related, I think receiver is right there. And you talk about the familiarity, talk about, coming from Washington, stuff like that. These guys, I think that's going to be that's going to be kind of their X factor, this coaching staff, how much they have worked together, how much they know the system, how unique this system is. So to immediately take a guy in Milroe who played well last year, right, but still felt like there was another element to add to his game. Part of that was probably because maybe he was forced to use his legs sometimes because of the offensive line and because of the wide receiver room. So when you start to stay on schedule, as great as Milroe has been off schedule, getting him on schedule is actually a whole new part of his game. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, this is a player who should allow you to run parts of your offense very much on schedule. And
Yep.
if he can beat a guy off the line of scrimmage, the space that he forces a defense to give him should be able to create some throwing lanes for Jalen Milroe to where it's not kind of a coverage sack. And there were too many of those last year. So if he helps with that in year one, then I think that's a bigger win, more so than, hey, is this guy going to put up Jameson Williams numbers or something like that? I don't expect that to be the case, but I do expect him to be able to provide some of that versatility that is very, very much needed in that receiver room.
Yes, I'll say one really quick for Bama. And this is a guy I just want to see more of is Jam Miller. I think that the way that he made his presence felt, played in the Georgia game, kind of left me wanting for more. In an offensive room that is so much in flux, a guy like that can be a plug and play type of guy over this short period of his career. I'm interested to see him take on a bigger role and just kind of what that room looks like as well.
I think he and Justice Haynes will be given plenty of opportunities in that running back room. I love Jason McClellan, but those guys will step in and be able to, I would think, have a good amount of success. I know that the Washington run game wasn't necessarily one of the nation's best or anywhere close, just because the volume didn't really dictate that. But I do think those guys can still have a lot of success if they tap into some of the balance that they had a little bit more so, like when DeBoer was at Fresno State and even in Indiana, where it wasn't necessarily 40, 50 passing attempts per game. Okay, Arkansas. Luke Hasz, the tight end, who last year, if he stays healthy, he gets all SEC love as a true freshman.
So nasty. That's why I made that face. I have nightmare. This guy crushed LSU. Anyway,
like half of his production basically came in that LSU game, though. I went back and watched it. It was like, oh my God. It
was him, too. He was making plays. Like, some of it was open, but a lot of it was him out there going out and getting it.
Yeah, there were a couple of moments when you're like, oh yeah, this LSU secondary, they can't even tie their own shoes. They're that bad. And then there are other times where you're exactly right. He's going up there and he's making big time plays. A really good feel for the offense, and for, when things break down, it felt like he was getting open. But think about this: true freshman tight end who in 4 plus games, 16 catches, 253 yards, 3 touchdowns. And he was 6th in receiving yards among tight ends in all of college football when he suffered that season-ending injury against A&M. This guy was so good that On3 made him a true freshman All-American, even though he played like a third of the season. That is hard to be able to do. I do think that his injury made a significant impact on the Arkansas offense. Was Dan Enos going to see the end of the season? Probably not. But I think they would have had some better moments with a guy that was establishing himself as one of the go-to players, maybe the go-to player for KJ Jefferson. Maybe he wasn't the biggest KJ Jefferson fan based on some of the comments that he's made about Taylon Green's leadership compared to KJ's. That's neither here nor there. We don't bang the drum against KJ. That's just not something that we're ever going to do. But this Arkansas offense, it's now being run by the one and only Robert Patrick Petrino. they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, which might free up Has to be able to kind of kick out to the slot. He could, line up out wide, try and preserve his receiving abilities, try and get him into some mismatches. He could be one of the best tight ends, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country if he stays healthy. If. He's still very football young as well. That's something to keep in mind. I saw him, I was watching the Ride and Round show, and he talked about how he got into football his sophomore year because he couldn't play his other sports during COVID. So he put on some weight, and they're like, hey, you should go out for football. I said, oh yeah, I'll give it a shot. And lo and behold, pretty darn good at it. Things worked out very, very well for Luke Has. Arkansas fans don't need to bang the drum for him. LSU fans probably shouldn't need to bang the drum for him either. Others will soon understand how good this guy is already.
Listen, that's a shared experience here in SEC country. You put on a little bit of weight and the football coaches start looking at you different. They're like, hey, son, you ever played before? Nah, I just like to eat. Oh, well, we'll see you at 6. I didn't commit to any of this. What are you talking about? We'll see you at 6. But yeah, that seems like very football coach move to just be like, hey, you're looking a little bit thick in the legs there, son. I think we could use you as an inline blocker. No, but I'm right there with you. And funny enough, using him as an inline blocker would be kind of misusing him because of what we saw, the diversity, even in his young football career, the route tree, the ability to win one-on-ones, things that make a difference in your limited reps as a tight end. If you're not Brock Bowers or, early career Eric Gilbert, there's only been a couple of guys like that. So I use that example as true. Okay, you're going to get targets to this volume. You got to show something in those limited targets. And there are so many guys that are almost there that we've seen over the years. Okay, well, this guy, if he had a couple more targets, usually they don't come for tight ends. It's because they don't show what Luke Has did in just a short period of time. So if you have a guy like Robert Patrick, one thing about him is he can use players as kind of tools in his machine, and he knows how to get guys into good spots. And I think that this is an exciting opportunity because we've seen kind of some of that old school, a little bit of a downhill run game from Robert Patrick, not exactly ground and pound murder ball type stuff, but you do fear the run in ways that we didn't exactly get in some versions of Arkansas, partially because the offensive line, partially because of Rocket, not worth getting into. But the fact that you could get him in those 2 tight end sets to where it's not, okay, he's the lone tight end. We know we got to keep a guy on him the entire time. We got to communicate to cover this guy now. Okay, now we got to worry about the run. We got to worry about his blocking. So, yeah, I really am bullish on Arkansas despite how everything ended last year, despite them losing their quarterback. I think it was nice to have a fresh reset. Those 2 guys, Rocket and KJ, that have been carrying the team for so long. Just let's start something over. Let's not try to force them into these new roles. Let's start something over. I think this is one of the guys, if you're an Arkansas fan, you could say, okay, if he stays healthy, I feel like we got something here.
A little bit worried that he got banged up in camp already. I hope this doesn't turn into one of those guys who's just always injured. Sam Pittman said he's fine. It was just a low ankle deal. But he needs reps. He needs reps. And you had a chance to be a 50 snap per game guy as a true freshman, which is such a blessing. And I think so unbelievably valuable if you can get it. And he, wasn't able to stay on the field and have that opportunity. But if he can be out there and continue to develop, that creates a unique weapon, a weapon that Arkansas desperately needs. If you're going to beat some of these teams that you're not supposed to beat, you need more Luke Has 2023 LSU performances. That's the way that you do it. And I think it'll give that offense a little bit of juice coming into a season when they have a lot of questions to be able to answer. Auburn, Eugene Asante, the linebacker who I thought he would be ineligible to be on this list because this guy got off to such an unbelievable start. The former UNC transfer, the former scout team guy who didn't play a game in 2022, which probably a knock against the Harsin staff. Not that you needed another one of those, but definitely not a great look. I wonder if he was fully healthy down the stretch. But here's what I know to be true. Auburn doesn't go to a bowl game if Eugene Asante isn't out there. He single-handedly won them that Cal game. He was everywhere that night. They had no business winning that game. They did not. And yeah, part of it, like if Jaden Ott stays healthy for Cal, it's a little bit of a different story, maybe, perhaps. But Eugene Asante was a man possessed that night. One of the best individual defensive performances in all of college football last year. And it wasn't just a one-game deal with him. If you recall, this man could have just absolutely destroyed. I'll even go so far as to say he could have killed Jimbo Fisher. He could have, because Jimbo is just wandering out onto the field. And look, he could have prevented him from seeing that $77 million, and he didn't. That's great awareness in that moment. I don't know what a life insurance policy looks like for someone that's got a buyout that big, but it's big.
Yeah.
Eugene Asante would have, I don't know how much he would have been on the hook for it, but look, shows great awareness in a moment in which his heart was probably beaten through his chest to be able to get the football and return it the other way. But yeah, they are building a defense around him. That's the goal. That's what DJ Durkin is trying to do. I'm not a big DJ Durkin guy, but I will credit him for unleashing Edgerrin Cooper, who was awesome last year for A&M. And I'm hoping that's exactly how they're going to use Eugene Asante. Wouldn't surprise me if he's one of these guys in year 6 who just looks like he's older and better than everyone on the field. I think he's got a lot of those moments coming up in 2024.
Yeah, I feel as though Jimbo's life insurance would be in like Buffalo nickels or something, like just some weird currency. It's like, here's 1 million Buffalo nickels. Anyway,
straight cash, homie.
Straight cash. Yeah, I'm glad that you reminded me of that Auburn Cal. That was the one that finished at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, right?
Oh, so late, Will. It was so late.
I was watching that game thinking of you, texting you. I felt the text coming in later and later. Like it would be 1, 2 minutes, and it was like 5. I was like, this man is so cozy right now. He wants so badly for Auburn to put this game away. That I'm glad you reminded me of that game. That feels like it happened on Mars because it was so weird. It was like, early in the season, and it was like, okay, these are like, we'll look back on this and kind of laugh one day, and this is that. So, but yeah, to your point,
we're laughing. We're very much laughing at that game because Hugh Freeze, I remember, was not happy to be going out to Berkeley, not happy in the slightest, and he came back from that one, and one of those, just thank God we came back with a win. They needed it. They needed to be able to get to a bowl game. So Eugene Asante, maybe he should just get the bowl game bonus that Hugh Freeze got.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's the thing. It's like, not to get too metaphorical, but this whole thing at Auburn has been about, okay, how can we tear it down, start over? You're guys that you can count on kind of in those foxholes, because that game was about, not losing it, right? And so you can kind of see like Auburn is still not a fully formed organism. It feels like we really just pressed sim season. I've talked about that. I really can't evaluate Auburn because I don't feel like they really progressed in any way. They didn't really get worse, but they didn't really get better. And, when you have a guy, he said it's that deep into his football career, you can look for that leadership. And I think that the transfer portal era, one thing that does get kind of missed is that we talked about this actually in the last podcast as far as how hard it is to rebuild a defense. It's because of leadership. It's because of guys like this that are rarely become available, right? This is a guy who's been through the wars of Brian Harsin. This is the guy who it's going to get better for him. You know what I'm saying? Not worse. And that's the type of guy that you can say, okay, look, I'm still here. I've been here. We can figure this out. And I'm not going to, I'm putting my stake in the ground and saying I'm an Auburn Tiger. And I think that's rare. So just for any university in flux like that, coaching changes, that type of stuff. So as insane as this sentence says, as Hugh Freeze and DJ Durkin try to build a culture, this guy is going to be pretty pivotal. As tough as those guys have had their cultures in the past, and I do not mean to skate over that, when you want to get guys on the same page, and if you want to get a football team moving in a direction, hopefully this is the team that, especially offensively, Hugh Freeze gets to have his fingerprints all over. But again, say what you will about DJ Durkin, we know who he is, right? And so we know he likes to kind of bring the pressure. He likes to, play a little bit of an aggressive style. So yeah, I think this is a very pivotal piece for him.
I don't know if they're going to have to win games as ugly as they won that Cal game, but I think Auburn's going to have to win some 24-17 type games. I do. I don't think we're getting to a place where all of a sudden it's like, just set it and forget it. Auburn's hitting 35 points. I don't expect that to happen in year 2. And Eugene Asante, a big part of whether or not they're going to be able to do that. Okay, Florida, Cam Jackson, the defensive tackle. Speaking of defensive players who single-handedly won their team a game in September, go back and watch Cam Jackson against Tennessee. He was a one-man wrecking crew. I know we talked a lot that night about the Desmond Watson play where he got to Joe Milton, and it was like, can you imagine Desmond Watson falling on you?
Yep.
That is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But Cam Jackson... it's kind of why the king Desmond Watson's taking a bit of a back seat at nose tackle. He started every game, and while he's not tipping the scales at 400 pounds, guy's 374, and he's playing 30 snaps per game. So there is definitely a part of me that wishes his emergence could have coincided with Desmond Watson's instead of kind of taking the place of. But the Memphis transfer has done really well for himself. would have been at the Senior Bowl, decided to come back this year. They needed him healthy down the stretch. And I don't know that he necessarily was, or at least he was dealing with injuries, I think, in the first part of November. They need him to be out there for like 40 snaps a game. And if that means, hey, he's got to lose 15, 20 pounds, I don't know if that's part of the plan, but it would make a lot of sense. They need guys out there, those veteran, get you behind schedule type guys in the trenches. That's not so much scheme dependent, because I don't really have a ton of faith in Florida to do that just yet with Austin Armstrong. I know I was optimistic early, but really not buying that. Going to take a lot of guys winning one-on-one matchups, and Cam Jackson gives you a chance to do that. Florida was 122nd in the country in yards per play allowed. Basura. Can't have it. Can't have it. This guy needs to play at an all SEC level. I think he can because of his ability to win those one-on-ones. Needs to get a little bit better as a pass rusher. But I think if Florida is going to just not be a total doormat on defense, which they've been the last 4 seasons every year during the 2020s decade, I think it'll be in part because Cam Jackson's a force like what we saw against Tennessee.
Yeah, I think that we've seen 2 equally mid but radically different Florida teams under Billy Napier. And it was, radically different teams. It's as different as 2 mid teams can honestly be, right? Because the first year, you had strong offensive line play. You had decently strong D-line play. That was another like one-man army on defense. It was Ventrell Miller that they had?
Ventrell Miller, middle linebacker, but yeah, somebody that was very valuable.
He was like in the box, like he was a run stuffer type guy.
Yes,
like,
very.
And so
he was the run stuffer. When he was hurt, they could not stop the run. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I was like, I imagine this like being a big, but it was Ventrell Miller who was a great run stopper, and so they had that type of guy, right? And so they were thin, but they were talented at the top, right? They just couldn't really throw the football. I think Richardson not going to get it, all that, whatever. Following year, it was like, we're starting to bring some guys in, but we've lost a lot of this offensive line. We've lost the Ventrell Millers. We've lost these stars at the top of the roster. So while we have like a little bit more depth, it's so much more interchangeable, which is kind of like we don't have any guys. We have a bunch of guys. And so when you think about, where this needs to go, right? Exactly what you just talked about. Guys that understand the defense, guys that can be like, okay, I can count on you for this, right? Talked about Watson. We love Watson. It's all going to be about snap count with these big guys, right? Even like Jordan Davis, the question about him going to the Eagles was like, how many snaps is he going to play? Doesn't matter, because
he's going to make an impact. You're going to know.
He's going to make an impact.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you could start to kind of stack those guys together, okay, well, you have some Cam Jackson. You got some Watson. You're not expecting either guy to play the totality of the game, but you're letting, so that play, exactly what you talked about in the Tennessee game, is so indicative, right? Because Watson's impact was so limited, but so maximized, right? And so same deal. If you could keep these top end guys in the rotation, you can kind of continue to play this game on the back end where you start to plug in transfers. You start to get kind of no-name guys filling in because you have guys that you can look at them like Ventrell Miller and go, what do you do here? That's your job. We're going to build around that. When you start to lose those guys the way you did last year, it starts to be in flux. So yeah, I really just think it's about clearly defined roles. It's about having, the adults in the room that can call the right plays, that can coach guys up, that can scheme. Again, not going to dump on Austin Armstrong. We'll see. He's just a younger guy. Hopefully he learned a lot over the offseason and can say, how to put those guys in a better spots. But that's the thing, for Florida, it's not been about recruiting. We talked about this. It's not really been about talent. You look up and down the roster, you can see a ton of 4-stars, right? Blue chip guys, as they always say with Billy. So all you need is for a couple of those guys that are underclassmen to pan out when you have the leadership.
The weird thing is that, and this doesn't really line up with the Florida trajectory and really kind of how we talk about the program in a rebuild mode that is still in entering year 3 of the Billy Napier era. They've had a lot of these portal hits. They really have. Look at Cyrus Torrence, who obviously was somebody that was with Billy Napier before at Louisiana. Montrell Johnson was with Billy Napier. Ricky Pearsall, who's going to hear his name called probably in the second round of the NFL draft. Even Graham Mertz, a guy that's been better than we thought he was
better than we thought, yeah.
And so, like, their portal evaluations have been good. Cam Jackson, the portal evaluation was good. It's just about getting these guys to consistently be out there and play at an even higher level for you instead of the flashes. That's what he needs to be able to do this year, and that's what's going to help Billy survive this ever-daunting path to be able to get a year 4. Georgia. I talked about this guy the other day, but got to bring him up again. C.J. Allen, the linebacker. I don't want to repeat myself too much because a lot of the discussion with Allen was brought up in our SEC DC rankings But his presence as a true freshman linebacker, it was felt in such a big way. It's why losing someone like Jamon Dumas-Johnson in Kentucky wasn't seen as this massive deal for Georgia, at least not internally. He was a starter for 3 regular season games. He won SEC Freshman of the Week twice. Pretty good. That's a really good start. I don't know that he's going to be able to keep that pace up, be SEC Defensive Player of the Week throughout his entire career for 2/3 of the games that he starts, but nonetheless, you feel good about that.
Well, especially at Georgia, where you're competing with upperclassmen, and Kirby, it never benefits him to like stick with the young guy and be like, "You're getting all the snaps," because another guy start. So to really have that confidence already is rare.
Yes, and that is something that he clearly has earned in a very short period of time. Again, he's coming in as a 5-star, so obviously the pedigree is there, and they knew what he was even back, in the spring, and you hear some of the comments about him, but still to actually see it out there in live action, to see how he handles a start, how he handles game planning and stuff like that. That's the type of stuff that Georgia was able to see with the injury to Jamon Dumas-Johnson. I always feel like I just bang the drum for those inside linebackers of Georgia. I mean, it's Roquan, it's Monty Rice, Nakobe Dean, like these guys are just so developed, so unbelievably good. The discipline that they play with, that's an area that I think we're going to see Allen take that next step. I think he's going to get better with more reps. Those instincts, the fearlessness that guy plays with already, it's just something that you can't teach. Brooks Austin had the photo of him in his new number 3. Who else wore number 3 and was a stud middle linebacker at Georgia? Maybe won an SEC Defensive Player of the Year honor. Roquan. Yeah, that's right. So maybe he's the next Roquan. I certainly would not bet against it at this point. All in on CJ Allen. Have had CJ Allen stock since seeing him come into that Mizzou game and make an immediate impact.
Yeah, I think you've hit on all the reasons why we're both fired up for that. And it's like, in these big machines, like I said, you get guys that are 1 year in, 1 year out, and to have the ability to build something and say, okay, we know what you can do. Let's add to it. It's not, and that's the luxury that Georgia has, is not, we have these big holes. How do we fill them? If they ever would have had that, it would have been after the first national championship. And so point being, they've proven that, again, they define what you can do. And if you can't do it, they'll get you out of there. And so the fact that he's done that so early is massive. I will say one, I'll add one to that 3. Talk about Oscar Delp for a second. This is a guy I'm so excited to watch. I'm so excited to watch him in that starring role. We just talked about Brock Bowers, and I was one of the few tight ends we've seen in the SEC really get those volumes. Kyle Pitts is another guy worth mentioning that got that volume. Well, Delp showed, and like that showed me so much that he was able to plug in and beat 80% of Brock Bowers, who can fly. I think that, having the career he has, not starting off at Georgia, kind of having to figure out, okay, you got this weird tight end room. You had Washington. You have Eric Gilbert. He still was the guy the whole time that was just like, hey, watch out for this guy. Watch out for Oscar Delp. And then he came in last year when Bowers went down, and we saw why. We saw he was trusted on third downs. We saw not only could he make the spectacular catches, he had a couple of like not freshman moments, like younger moments, but consistently he was the guy who was being looked at by Carson Beck. And Carson Beck being, one of, if not the premier returning quarterback in the SEC, he loved that safety blanket. And Brock Bowers, no, he didn't need it necessarily, right? But we saw that in the SEC championship game, when he didn't have his little safety blankets, he wasn't quite as effective. He wasn't a bum. I'm calling him a bum or anything. I'm just saying, he likes to have his guys. He likes to have his guys he trusts. Well, Delp is already there. And yeah, it's tough to follow Brock Bowers, but the thing that they do at Georgia, I mean, even Washington, who was a telephone pole, was a great blocker. Like I would be terrified to get squared up by Washington. He's a useful football player, even if he's not getting targets. Same thing with Delp. They develop these tight ends. It's not like, oh, you're a pretty little gadget player. It's like, you're about to get out there and hit somebody. That's how you get on the field at every position for Georgia. That's why Ladd McConkey was out there as long as he was, because he was hitting dudes. And so, point being, I'm excited to see full-time, no, not temp agency, Oscar Delp in a starring role.
I remember I did something with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette right after the draft, and it was right after the Steelers took Darnell Washington. I told one of the reporters, I'm like, wait until you stand next to Darnell Washington, and you'll rethink the human species. Trust me when I tell you that. And Delp is not of that physical freak where you look at him and you're just like, oh my God. There are guys on this list, and we're about to get to one in a second, where you will stand next to them and you will go, oh Lord, this dude is different. There's no way that we were raised on the same planet. But the ability to make some of those spectacular catches and be that guy that you can just do a lot of different things with, I am very optimistic about Oscar Delp, even if the run blocking isn't quite as good, even if he doesn't become as high a volume a player as Brock Bowers was, where he just takes over games. But those splash plays, those impact plays, especially seeing how Mike Bobo used the tight ends last year, I agree with you. Definitely could have gone with Oscar Delp. Tom Fornelli brought this up the other day. There's like 5 or 6 guys you could go with for Georgia on an all bang the drum team, and would have no resistance whatsoever.
Yes, I will say this really quickly on Delp. So it's funny, right? Because we see him with Georgia players. This is a guy who is 6'5", 250. He's actually bigger than Brock Bowers. Yeah. Now, again, Brock Bowers is different, but compared to Darnell Washington, LeBron looks small. So right. I did just want to say, I also got the vibe that he was a little bit smaller on Georgia, still 6'5", 250.
Still a very big dude. He's going to be able to throw his weight around for sure. Kentucky, Deion Walker. Speaking of physical freaks, oh my Lord. Mm-hmm. He was only a second-team All-SEC guy last year. I went back and looked this up because I was like, I swear he was a first-team guy. And I think Kentucky's bio said he was a first-team guy. And then I looked up the AP and it said he wasn't on the AP team. So he's probably going to start as a first-team guy. So I'm making kind of an exception here just because I don't know that enough people in the SEC are talking about how good this guy is. His motor is unbelievable. Maybe the single most impressive thing about Deion Walker is that this man is nearly 350 pounds. And the only time that he failed to play 50 snaps was in week 3 when he played 47 snaps.
Oh,
yeah. Crazy. Snap count is a big deal when you are that size. And it's that kind of can often determine, hey, do I need to be able to lose weight to be able to play and make more of an impact? This guy does not need to. And the things that he can do at that size, he has shown that he can play that big. He was 5th in the country in snaps among interior defenders. Here's how insane this is. If you make the cutoff 320 pounds for interior defensive linemen like I did on PFF, there are 2 interior defensive linemen who played 550 snaps. UCF's Lee Hunter, who played 577 snaps, and Deion Walker, who played 728 snaps.
As a freshman.
Not as a freshman.
Sorry. This is his second year. My bad. He's an underclassman, though. That's what I was going to say is he was like that big recruit that they told him he was going to play. And, buddy, everyone holds up their end of the bargain there. That is the highest snap count I've ever seen in my life. What a D-tackle.
One of these guys who, Stoops has had some of these guys. The Keontae Goodwin, just didn't work out. It was Justin Rogers, I think it was, who ends up at Auburn. Like some of these guys who are big, trenches guys who are just like, oh man, that's going to be a future stud. And some of these guys come in with all this hype and it just for whatever reason hasn't panned out. Deion Walker is not one of those guys. He is not. Yeah. I am getting ahead of this because if the mock drafters have done their homework, this guy is going to be all over them when they come out for 2025. It's not just the production, which 12.5 TFL, 7.5 sacks at that size. He plugs running lanes. He gets to quarterbacks. He bats down passes. I went back and watched this one play that he made against Florida last year where he lines up on the edge and he drops back into coverage. And all of a sudden, he's moonlighting as a middle linebacker. And Graham Mertz thinks that he has a receiver sitting in zone coverage, which he does. But when the throw is slightly high, Walker pops this guy like a middle linebacker and Kentucky picks it off. A 350-pound guy who just drops back and drifts into coverage and makes a play like this. It was just absolutely insane. Some discipline questions that I've heard about internally with him and being able to put it all together. But man, if he can lock in, the sky is the limit. Very, very special player Deion Walker can be in 2024.
Yeah, it feels like, this is just what Stoops is known for. Like we talked about guys that kind of have, we talked about this with defensive coordinators, or it's like guys that stay there and kind of do one thing. Stoops is found, he will find a couple of diamonds in the rough. Now, for Walker, he was just outside the top 200, which is usually about on the upper end of the talent. This is not, your 3-star guy that we've seen them turn around. He has the size, he has the speed, to always be kind of thought of that upper echelon. There's a recruiting battle for him. But that being said, one thing that they can hang their hat on at Kentucky is developing guys, right? You talk about, this guy is this red flag. He's got a little bit of a rumbling of this. Well, the fact that they can, Stoops, like no other coach in the country, I think, can get guys pulling in this one direction and say, this is what we are. This is who we are. I don't care what you think about it. This is where we're going. Right. And to be like that, kind of the spearhead of one of those classic defenses that, we've seen over and over again with UK. that, we've seen all this talk about their offense. We've seen, okay, you got this quarterback in, you got Vandegrift, you got these receivers in, da da da. But fundamentally, that takes the shine away from what's always been the shine and how Kentucky was turned around, which is dudes you don't want to see in a back alleyway. And that is exactly what this guy is.
I cannot imagine being a running back and seeing a center or a guard that just got beat and can't even get a paw on this guy.
Yeah.
And he has a head of steam coming at you. That's I mean, maybe that's a future episode. Most terrifying sights in college football in 2024.
Yeah.
Deion Walker with a head of steam, buddy.
Yeah.
Get out of the way. Do the Manning sack. Just go down. Just go down.
Yeah.
You have no chance whatsoever. I hope he puts it all together. I hope he doesn't have one of these years where we look back and we're like, he just didn't quite live up to that potential, because, man, when it's right, it is so remarkable and things that you just cannot teach at that size. All right, LSU, Will. Went with Zy Alexander here. Just when it looked like Alexander was developing into that lockdown corner that LSU so desperately needed last year, he gets hurt. He's out the rest of the year. Kind of fitting for a unit that just couldn't get out of their way, couldn't get anything going their way. It was just bad all around for LSU. I know that Kelly took a lot of heat for kind of settling on the smaller school guys outside of maybe Denver Harris. It was a lot of these smaller school guys that you're bringing into the secondary.
Well, none of them worked. So, I mean, wherever they came from.
Yeah, I mean, Southeast Louisiana.
Could be Syracuse. It could be A&M. Wherever you come from, brother, you're not going to work on this defense.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that worked with it last year. I don't know that it was, specific to what school they were coming from. Yeah. But, I didn't think that secondary was bad because of Alexander. Now, he had some tough moments early in the year, but I thought he was making them better. And even if he wasn't like some 2019 Derek Stingley Jr., anything like that, he still did his part on the outside before he went down. Could have used him against Bama for sure. It's such a difficult thing to do, to get guys who aren't scared to line up on the outside every single time against a big physical receiver in the SEC. I imagine every day in practice he was going up against Brian Thomas Jr., and that probably made him a lot better than whatever competition he was going against at Southeast Louisiana. And he was able to do that, and he's going to fit in well with Blake Baker's defense, which had a couple of these guys that are going to get drafted early at corner at Mizzou, with Rakestraw, with Abram Strain. So I think that bodes well. I'm not saying it's going to be DBU all over again, but I am a believer that secondary is going to improve, especially if Alexander can be healthy, locked into that top spot.
Yeah, Zy feels like he's kind of, let me try to think how to say this. He feels like the victim of kind of the exclusionary camp culture and recruiting. Because you look at this guy, I mean, he's huge. He's like 6'3".
6'2", 6'3", yeah.
Yeah, it depends on where he's listed. 6'2" to 6'3", about in that 180 to 190 range, just depending on where he's been measured or whatever. But yeah, he's huge, right, for a corner. He's fast, right? So it's like, what are we missing here? He has the technique. That weirdly is probably the guy that we feel like, outside of the, Wingo, random guys here and there. But the guy that really they did hit on it, like you said, Southeast. It's like, how is this guy
from Louisiana? Like, how did you not get the LSU offer coming out?
Yeah. So like that's like one thing I'll give the staff credit is they have found a lot of these guys from the state. I think that Zy Alexander is literally the positive spot on the defense last year. I think that, to your point, it's like this guy was tasked with some really hard matchups with pretty rough coaching and was able to lock in. And I think it was you that put me on receivers are like getting smaller. Zy Alexander can cover and match up with anyone in the game, even tight ends. You know what I'm saying? We talk about, okay, yeah, I'm 6'4", 6'5", 230, I'm a tight end. Well, if you're 6'3" or 6'2" as a corner, you could run step for step with him, and that's not as scary. So he's the type of guy that you're right. He can welcome that outside matchup. He has the size. He has the speed. I am fascinated to see, there's 8 or 9 DBs we could talk about from LSU that could really see playing time. But one thing I've seen throughout is that they're like, hey, Zy's been hurt, but he's the guy. Like, let's talk about 2 through 8 at that point.
I'm interested if they get the Kool-Aid McKinstry treatment for him, where they're just going to like leave him on the outside, just like leave him on a side and not necessarily worry about, oh, you're going to shadow this guy for an entire game. Just, we want you to be on the outside. We think that's where you're most valuable. And our other guys are a little bit more interchangeable, but we only have so many guys that can do the things that you do on the outside, where you can line up single coverage press and track all the way downfield. I know he was doing that against Auburn as well. But I think that's probably going to be more so the fit, as long as he's healthy, which is, a big if. something that LSU, even though they do have more depth in the secondary, something that they desperately need this year.
I will say real quick. First off, I'm glad that Kool-Aid was doing that against neighbors. That was a little bit of barbecue chicken, a nice little middle game day snack. But point being, there's a guy that I've been talking about a little bit. I feel like he had a down year, even though his numbers didn't really say that, but it certainly did have the impact he had the year before. I think that Mason Taylor is kind of almost flying under the radar at this point for LSU. This is another guy that in this system, right? I've talked about it. They could go to more two tight ends, get away from that kind of NFL style personnel. They're going to remake the offense, obviously. There's only one Jaden Daniels. I've said it time and time again. But Mason Taylor is one of those few guys in the SEC where I feel like the volume could really be there to be a top level tight end. I feel like he has everything that Brian Kelly wants. He has, he's played special teams. He's been a grinder. He's been a leader. He's gotten back from the adversity. We talked about, his first game, he was the reason why the PAT was blocked against FSU, comes back and wins the Bama game on the 2-point conversion. Compared to that, almost any season for a tight end would feel pretty under the radar. But considering, the great receivers LSU had last year, he kind of fell down the pecking order. Well, remember when Jaden got there, that offense was designed to just stare at him on every play. Or maybe that's what Jaden did. Who knows? But it happened. And I think that kind of goes to show his kind of the linchpin he can be in an offense. Now, again, there will be more tight ends. The receivers will be different. It will be a lot more of those two tight end sets we were talking about. But I think that his name is worth mentioning because people kind of forgot about this guy. And I think he is one of the best tight ends in the SEC.
Yeah, last year just the role was different. It was different than what he was as a true freshman. It was because Neighbors emerged into arguably the best receiver in college football, and Brian Thomas wasn't very far behind him. And it's sometimes you kind of look, and then I even thought Kyron Lacey had his moments where he was doing things really well in the passing game. So it's just there's only one football, and tough to be able to feed all those mouths. But yeah, the history of tight ends that Brian Kelly has had with a Michael Mayer, who obviously didn't finish his career with Brian Kelly, a Cole Kmet, guys like that have been tremendous.
Travis Kelce, come on.
Oh yeah, we can go back to Cincinnati. Travis Kelce, who could forget? I told you about that story in The Athletic that Justin Williams wrote ahead of the Super Bowl about the Kelce brothers at Cincinnati. It was so unbelievably good. Even if you've had too much Kelce brother content over the course of the last couple of years, just very, very good and a good little insight into how wild those guys were in college. Mississippi State. This was tough. I'm going to be honest, Mississippi State fans. And if you're listening to this, what awaits this year. It's going to be really difficult. You need as many guys you can bang the drum for as humanly possible. But I went with Creed Whittemore, the receiver who has probably the best first aim in all of college football.
Let's go there.
So many different ways that you can take that. I mean, Creed might be my favorite, most versatile name, because of not only the band, not only the Office character, but the movies are great too. I mean,
true.
It hits on every single level.
Creed's Clearwater Revival as well. All kinds of Creeds going on. Sure,
not my thing, but the thing for many others. Yeah,
wow. I thought we were cool, man.
I know,
like Born on the Bayou.
Just hasn't been my main thing that I've gotten into. Everybody's got holes in their game, but a lot of Creed love. Creed Whittemore, fourth in those power rankings, probably fifth more so far. Gainesville native, converted quarterback, was excellent early last season. And then the Mississippi State offense stunk up the joint like few in the entire sport. Naturally, one of those who suffered was Whittemore. With Lebby running that offense, I'm optimistic that we see his versatility on display a little bit more. He's got to be one of these foundational pieces, I would think. I don't know why he wasn't on the field more. I really don't. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's learning the position a little bit, trying to develop as a route runner, but it felt like that team, from an offensive standpoint, should have left no stone unturned with how bad it got. Maybe even lining him up as a Wildcat quarterback, because again, the quarterback experience in high school. But we see in that season opening game, he has those 2 carries for 57 yards, one of which was a 53-yard touchdown. He only got 2 carries the rest of the season. What are you doing?
It was working too well.
Kevin Barbay, yikes, punting on that one. Just didn't make any sense. I have to think that he'll get more unique looks in this offense, whether that's, out of the slot, which is where he probably is going to line up the majority of the time, get him some backfield touches. I don't know. But remember, this guy could have hit the portal, but stayed with that new coaching staff. He stuck with the program after the death of Mike Leach as well. Extremely loyal, needs to be rewarded, needs to be on the field, needs to get the football. He should be a weapon. Perhaps one of the few bright spots for Mississippi State this year.
I love this one. I love this one so much, and I'll tell you why. Is that exactly what you just said? Okay, and not that these players went through this, but it does matter philosophically. You go from Joe Moorhead. We know what that offense is. A little bit more of that pro style. You switch out to the kind of like evolved air raid that Leach was running. It was still air raid, you know what I'm saying? But it was just it was like more spread out than ever. And so, boom, okay. Then we switched to a pistol. Okay, boom, now we're here. And so, point being, and we've talked about some of the things that Lebby can do. And one thing that I think, okay, if you're a Mississippi State fan, like to your point, get ready to be not great this year, but I think this year will be more fun than last year. Because
I don't know, man. Will, they've had 40 players hit the portal in the last 2 years, in the last 2 portal cycles. They've had half of their roster turnover. I don't know if that it's going to be very fun.
But here is the essence of college football, right? Hopium, right? You knew pretty early, unfortunately, that my guy Zach Arnett, great defensive coordinator, was just not cut out for that job. You knew about 3 or 4 weeks in. To be honest, I think the LSU game, because they had that the Arizona game before that
they should have lost. That felt like you guys let this one slip away. You had like 3 picks in the first quarter, and then you almost let this team come all the way back on your home field. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yep, it was like, hey, like we've kind of scapegoated Will Rogers, like, and again, you have that game you escape from, but then it's like, okay, well now you have the LSU game. How are you going to respond? Worse than ever. You got LSU, who had been reeling off of that FSU loss and made them look awesome and feel confident. Like their defense looked good for the only time that year. So point being, like, you knew that you were simming the season when you were Mississippi State very early. You knew there was not much to be excited about. You were waiting for the other shoe to drop. You were waiting for the portal to open and your guys to leave. You were waiting on these guys who you had these emotional relationships. Is this guy going to stay? Is that guy going to stay? Well, this year I think is going to be much more fun for Mississippi State fans because you're at the beginning of the ride, okay? That felt like the end of a very sad and tragic ride, right? That went from Moorhead to Leach, this tragic passing, to Arnett, who is kind of handpicked successor, but kind of more to keep that program going in terms of like keep all the staff. Well, then we did the clean break, and now it's like, hey, if we're bad this year, we're going to be fun bad. Like we're going to be like Lebby can get guys open. We're not having games go 3-7 with guys throwing stuff on the field. Like one thing about Lebby, he's not going to lose 3-7. Like
probably not. Counterpoint.
Okay.
Was Auburn fun this past year?
See, Auburn never committed. That was the deal, and that was what I said from the beginning. Like, that's why I said, let's start Robbie Ashford from the beginning. I said, let's just get out there and have fun, and let's just go believe in something, versus now we're going back to Peyton Thorne, and hopefully he's going to be better. But that's the thing, is that there was no hopium to sell at all for Auburn, because what were they going to believe in that was on that roster? Like, there were some cool guys, but there was not like, here's this. With Lebby, it's like, hey, the offensive adult is here in the room. We're going to have not a ton of talent. We're going to be filling through all these different ways, but you're going to see how guys can play. Great example with Auburn. It was about, let's get the receivers involved. They never got the receivers involved at Auburn. Here, Creed Whittemore has the best opportunity to get involved he's ever had, because there's nothing else. He could be like Ricky Pearsall in year 1 under Billy Napier. It's just like,
why you make that here, brother? Why you make that comp, Will? Why'd you make that comp? Why'd you go for that?
Why did I make that comp? Because he's going to be a target monster. He's going to be a target monster. Like, I think that he could be the one. Remember, we joked about in that FSU game, it was like 4 NPCs and Ricky Pearsall. Like, that could be great. And it kind of worked. Like, he was that good that Pearsall was able to pick that team up. And so, point being, when you see that you don't have a ton of talent, you look at the guys that do have talent, you go, what are you doing? Like, let's go. We don't have the luxury of getting you off the field anymore. Can you block? Like, what can you do? And so I get excited because you start to see we can get these diamonds in the rough in year 1, see who really has SEC talent, speed, size, and then we sell. Okay, we can get the receivers open, right? What Auburn didn't do. We can get the receivers open. So if you want to come to play offense, come play for Lebby, come play for Mississippi State. Let's do a little bit of a Diet Lane Kiffin here and say, I know Mississippi State fans are going to hate that, but the way they've done come to the SIP is exactly, you hired Lebby, all right? So, let's not pretend like that's not a version of what you're doing here. Let's get some fun offensive guys in here. Let's get some diamonds in the rough, and let's add through the portal. But this year is just like, okay, free money. Like, we know we're not going to be great, whereas last year it just kept getting worse.
True. I think there could be some moments that just make Mississippi State fans nauseous watching.
Oh, yeah.
Watching this year. And it's not to say that's going to be like that forever. We don't judge year 1 coaches on this show. More of a year 0 for Jeff Lebby. But hopefully Creed Whittemore provides some of that hopium, because goodness gracious, man, they need it. They need it real badly. All right, Mizzou. Marcus Carroll, the running back. You had me at Mizzou running back. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the beauty of Drink's pitch to running backs in the portal, high school recruiting as well, but more so in the portal. He already had Larry Roundtree and Tyler Beatty go off in his offense, but then he took a D2 walk-on and Cody Schrader happened. Like, that's easy sell in the portal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you're able to get a couple, not one, but two former 1,000-yard rushers from the group of five level. Nate Noel from App State, where he signed right after Drink left. I don't know if Drink was part of that recruitment at all, but he signed like right and committed right after Drink left for the Mizzou job. And then Carroll you get from Georgia State. It'll be interesting to see if this is a committee. There is always a bell cow in the Drink offense, even dating back to when he first got to run an offense at Boise State. I mean, you can look up and down, and there's always at least like a 2-to-1 ratio of lead back to second in command. So
even if it's Brady Cook and he's giving him 30 carries, somebody's carrying that wrong.
No, not Brady Cook. No.
We've had games where he's like, let's give Brady Cook 20 carries. Like, it's funny. That's what he does. He's like, hot hand, we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a hot hand. That's what I'm saying. Is I think he's like, I'm gonna find my guy. I'm gonna stick to him, and I'm gonna beat him into the ground. I'm gonna assume that's gonna be Carroll, although Noel's so far it sounds like very much like step for step with him, and this could be a true competition. But this guy was 6th in the country in rushing, and he was 1st in America with 22 carries per game. I can't imagine that Drink looked at him and thought, you know what? This guy would be a really good second stringer. I don't think that's going to be the case. Even with some moving pieces on the offensive line, I'm trusting that between Kirby Moore scheming, the attention the passing game is going to warrant with Luther Burden III, with Theo Weiss, with these guys that they have on the back end, with Marquise Johnson as well. Drink's background with having these elite backs, we will once again see an elite back, and that will be Carroll this year.
I love that. I think that is indicative of like, this is the type of team I think Mizzou is going to be. And I think that if you understand that guy, you understand at least what they're trying to do. Again, sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes guys get hurt or whatever. Like, but I think that's so crucial to the success. And you talked about it's like Schrader was just a like mecha awesome version of that guy. Like as good as like Roundtree was or whatever. Like Schrader was like, okay, well, we could do all kinds of stuff with you. You never get tired. You're this bowling ball. You're this leader. You're fast enough. You're 1-cut, 2-cut. Screen pass, like we could get you all over the field, and he was being used as a tool. And to your point, taking the play calling duties away from Drink and actually having a play caller that can get guys in their best spots. Well, now it's not just we're going to feed you Pete Carmichael carries, right? That's just first down. We're going to run the ball downhill no matter what. It's like these carries are going to become optimized. And so now we used to know it was the carries, which is still going to happen, but it's about touches. It's about opportunities, not just carry by Larry Roundtree, 2-yard gain. Feels like they've figured something out with optimizing those carries.
It's a whole lot different, I think, to call plays when you can have somebody that takes a bigger picture approach of, hey, this guy's feasting right now. He's taking over. We need to recognize this. This is the opportunity when we can really lean on him 4 consecutive plays where he's getting the rock. Our offensive line is getting off the ball. And instead of like, hey, we really only have one option, but having the passing game unlocked last year should bode well, even if it doesn't equate to having the volume that we've seen in the past from some of these guys. I still think that Carroll should benefit from bigger running lanes in the way that Schrader did. I mean, you have to account for Luther Burden on the back end. If that guy's not at the top of your scouting report, he's going to burn you. And so having that attention that's devoted to him and in the passing game specifically with an emerging Brady Cook, it should bode well for the ground game.
I want to say real quick, I do have one here too. You've heard me talk this guy up since I've been talking about like this Mizzou team. Theo Weiss. Oh man, I think that he has such an opportunity next year. I think we all know about Burden. We all know what Mizzou did last year. You've seen the way that defenses will commit to Burden, like Terrell Owens used to be in the NFL. Well, they'll have guys moving all around the field for him. The games that Mizzou's offense was really clicking in a way they were breaking the game open was when Brady Cook went, all right, I know they're trying to take their Burden out here. I'm finna hit Theo Weiss and be cool with it. I'm finna just feed Theo Weiss. And then that would shift the whole defense back over, and then boom, we get Burden over the top. Their 1-2 punch to me is so underrated because of the amount of carries and the amount of, like, I would say balance, but that's not exactly what Drake has been known for. It's kind of been more of a 60-40 run pass. This is a guy who could really be the X factor because in college, like, it's a little bit easier to just like strictly take one guy out of a game because you can really just commit infinite resources to it. It's not like the NFL where it was like, if you have a guy like Weiss that is a catch and run guy, he's a great route runner. He's been trusted on these big third and fourth downs. You get to add that, came from Oklahoma, good recruit, has the size, has like, that's the stuff I look for is like, do you have the opportunity? Do you have the tangibles? Can you make it? And I think that their rise is about these guys kind of staying together for a long time and playing well with each other. So I think he's kind of like the unheralded hero of this team because if you shut him down, everything starts to get in the muck. Whereas like Burden, they'll take him out of games on purpose and then we just go to Weiss and we keep moving,
Exactly. If you find that guy that can limit Burden in the slot, which is so much easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
And then, you have a guy on the outside that is, making plays that elevates your offensive floor. And that's what Theo Weiss was doing. I think Norfleet, the tight end, is going to be one of those guys who's going to be a lot more heavily involved this year as he continues to, get, increase the snap count and become more of a part of that passing game. But Theo Weiss was a guy that I felt like banged the drum for a lot last year.
Yeah.
Very much. And was somebody that kind of developed into that role, that complimentary role, and understood that too. Like would sing Burden's praises time and time again, was like, this cat is so special. Wasn't one of those guys who was like complaining about a lack of targets or the fact that he was second fiddle. Very much was on board for the ride. We'll wait and see if he can take another step this year. But even if he doesn't, he still provides a ton of value in that role. I like that call. Okay. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the team that he was at, Oklahoma and receiver position, Nick Anderson, not the former Magic player who missed those free throws game one of the 1995 NBA Finals. Not that Nick Anderson.
People don't forget.
Unfortunately, this neck of the woods, they definitely do not. Different spelling, no K for the Oklahoma wideouts, and I see that kind of Nick. Here is the list of core four receivers who averaged 20 yards per catch with double-digit receiving touchdowns last year. Nick Anderson. That's it. It's the list. It's the entire list. Yeah. Big play machine. 7 catches of 40 yards. I usually love the interchangeable receivers. That's more frequent on the All Bang the Drum team. But Anderson is an outside guy that's just going to be a brutal matchup for no shortage of SEC defenses. And because of the versatility that Oklahoma has at the receiver position, he can be that guy and be just fine and have a ton of big-time plays. Go ask Texas about him. Game-winning touchdown in that game last year. In 9 games last year, he either had a receiving touchdown or 90 receiving yards. That is big-time stuff for a redshirt freshman. Might not be a high-volume guy, but one of those guys that when he does something, as we talked about before with Jordan Davis, is like when he does something, you're going to know about it. He just makes that type of impact, and those guys are very hard to come by. Just great body control, tons of highlight reel plays. Only concern for him and his path to being an all-SEC receiver by season's end is that they just have so many weapons. You got Deion Burks coming over from Purdue. You have just a lot of guys coming back. Andrel Anthony, who was hurt and was their leading receiver before he went down. Like Drake Stoops is the only guy that they're really replacing from that passing game, and he was really good for Oklahoma. But man, I will continue to bang the drum for really the Oklahoma receiver room as a whole. And Anderson is just an absolute stud. Maybe the best bet to be this year's version of Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, Oklahoma's another one of those teams that has a ton of talent. They could go a ton of ways. I think you nailed this one. I would put him right there. And the reason why is, when you look through the statistical profiles of wide receivers, it's actually pretty tough to think about like deep threats that have consistent production. Like we've all owned John Brown in fantasy, right? And the thing about that is you never do it twice in a row because the thought of I have, John Brown in fantasy, I'm going to take this chance every week. This is a guy who did it, like you said, for 9 games. It wasn't 4 big games, 2 okay games, and nothing. It was, okay, we could trust you downfield. Should worry me a little bit more that, no Dylan Gabriel, who is a big time deep threat guy. However, he's not like this great pro, prospect. He's a smaller guy. I think that Oklahoma trusts their process as far as they've never as far as we've seen, kind of like Ohio State, not really bad quarterbacks over there. So I don't think like year to year it's going to be that big of a drop off. But that's so interesting to me as a statistical profile. Where you have a guy that, yeah, he's up over 20, but he has double-digit touchdowns. Like, it's not just like you're hitting this guy a couple of times a game. It's like, no, this is what this guy does. And again, I love Brian Thomas as a comp because he was similar, right? Brian Thomas, a little bit, he was a different guy. He's a huge guy. Like, he was able to really win through contact as well, and that's what gave him that depth. But where I go there is, we could talk about Deshaun Jackson is a guy I love that I look at and say, this is the rare guy who is a number one receiver, who is fast, and that's his main thing. Tyreek Hill, a little bit more to his game, right? He's a little bit stronger. He's, whatever. But like when you talk about a true deep threat, both of those guys are mad and consistent, or they have something else going on, like Randy Moss or Megatron or like one of those guys. This is a guy that is actually the hardest skill set to find in a receiver: consistency and deep threat ability. And when you have that and you're Oklahoma and you have the talent, that's where your offense can go.
Pretty good sign, too, that in the bowl game, I think he had 7 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown, something like that, with Jackson Arnold starting in that game. So if you're talking about rapport and, does it fall off without having Dylan Gabriel, feeding you targets? I would tend to think, no, that's not necessarily somebody that Oklahoma fans should have to worry about, but going to be a really, really difficult matchup for a lot of these outside corners in the SEC this year. Mm-hmm. Another receiver, Ole Miss, Jordan Watkins. I'm doing this because of all the names on the offense that Ole Miss has, where you can just rattle off dudes. You really could. Even though there's no more Quinshon Judkins, you can just rattle off dudes on that Ole Miss offense. This is a guy that even I've forgotten about this offseason. So I'm reminding myself to bang the drum for Jordan Watkins. It makes sense when, you talk about Trey Harris, Juice Wells, who transferred in, Caden Priestcorn, who for my money is the best returning tight end in the conference. Logan Diggs stepping in from LSU, obviously. And you hope, if you're an Ole Miss fan, that he can bring some of those elements that Quinshon Judkins brought to your offense. And then, of course, Jackson Dart is back getting private jet deals like it's no big deal. But Watkins is in the slot and is in a role that, look, I think he should thrive. This is a guy that should get a ton of targets from Jackson Dart. Former Louisville transfer, was 12th in the SEC in receiving. Among SEC returners, Luther Burden III, Trey Harris, Andrew Armstrong from Arkansas. Those are the only returning receivers from the SEC with more yards than Watkins last year. So that's also excluding like the Texas and Oklahoma guys and transfers and stuff like that. But you get it. Like, this guy has shown that he can get open against SEC competition. The attention that Ole Miss will have in the passing game, plus the inability for defenses to just turn around on Jackson Dart and man coverage. You can't do that. He's too good of a runner to do that. Mm-hmm. Watkins should be able to find the soft spot in the zone. I think he's going to have a big, big year. Not just a between the hashes guy. He's the only returning SEC receiver who had multiple 60-yard catches last year. One of which you might remember was against LSU. Big play in that game. Of course it was.
The cool thing about that is there's so many that it's really hard to distinguish them. So it's like, if I saw Hazard, I was like, I remember that guy. He was terrifying. But if I was sad at every time LSU gave up a 50-yard play, I'd be a sad dude. No, but point being, this is, okay, now hear me out here. People of Mississippi are going to be outside my door tomorrow. The thing, okay, Ole Miss, I have a similar vibe, except I feel like the talent is much more, and I'm much more likely they're going to figure it out than State this year, right? When I say that, I mean, you have this offense that I know is going to work. So I don't know exactly how they're going to get there, but I'm almost positive it's going to work. Because Jackson Dart, number one, Lane Kiffin, number two. I'd probably reverse the order on those two because Lane Kiffin's done a little bit more.
Charlie Weiss Jr., who is your third pick in the offensive coordinator draft?
Of course. And like, that's the thing. It's like, okay, like we talked about, years ago they lost Levy. What's that going to mean? Not much. They're just going to keep cooking, So point being, it's one of those, probably you've just, named the number one receiver from next year. It's just hard to tell with Lane. There are some guys like Michael Trigg is a good example of the guy that we thought would be a huge deal that just ended up not being one. I think that one guy that's interesting to me is Ulysses Bentley. He's always been, that I said, when they played together, I thought he was a little bit better than Judkins. Judkins was hurt. I understand that. But this is a guy that they're talking about, a guy who killed LSU, buddy. Every time that guy got the ball, I was wincing. I was like, not this boy Ulysses again. here he comes. And so, yeah, I think we're, again, saying the same things. Just as I said, in a way, with Mississippi State, you're getting guys open in space. You're going to maximize guys' talents. Well, that was a complimentary back last year. This year, it's like we were not exactly sure what the running back, situation is going to be. We're not sure if it's going to be a healthy one. When you talk about
Diggs has not been able to stay healthy throughout his career. So if all of a sudden you're like, hey, you're going to rely on Ulysses Bentley a lot more, then I think that's what they're hoping for. That's what they're expecting, and that's why you can go out and get somebody like Diggs, knowing that you still have a guy like Bentley coming back.
Exactly. And yeah, again, transfer portal, there's so many guys in and out. I forgot Diggs' name for a second, but he was awesome when he played. Like, don't get me wrong, I have no bad thoughts to him. I thought he was the key of LSU's offense when he was in. I think he's a great addition. I just think that Bentley has a little bit of a shake. And I think that Lane Kiffin loves him a dude with a little bit of a shake. We've seen that all the way going back to Alabama, USC. He could find a dude that could do that little bit of a make one guy miss, because Lane can get you one-on-one. And once you can make that one guy miss, world's your oyster. So I think you named, like, we've kind of seen the two guys that I think can stand to benefit from that.
You know what really confirms that Lane is the portal king? The skill players in his offense. Jackson Dart, transfer.
Yep.
Juice Wells, transfer. Trey Harris, transfer. Caden Prieskorn, transfer. Ulysses Bentley, transfer. Jordan Watkins, Louisville, transfer. Like, all of these guys who Lane has just been able to plug in and say, hey, here's your role. This is what it's going to look like. Let's go. That's an unbelievable thing, an unbelievably difficult thing to do, juggling those types of pieces. But Watkins might end up having, like, perhaps the most defined role in this offense, even more so. Maybe there are going to be days where, like, Trey Harris is just kind of like, oh, he's taking a back seat, or Juice Wells is kind of taking more of a back seat because, they just have so many different options and so many different ways to be able to beat you. But Watkins has an unbelievably high floor, I think, and is somebody that's going to be greatly valued. And some defenses are going to not pay attention to him and watch him go 60-plus yards for a touchdown, LSU.
This is all right, man. This is a fantasy draft. Like I said, those words can't hurt me. That's the past now. We got Blake Baker. Anyway, so what we're doing here is we're almost taking stocks. Like, it's like a fantasy draft, because it's like we're picking two of, like, the top 3 or 4 people we hope finish it off. Because, again, Juice Wells could have the best season of his career, and we could go, oh man, this guy, right? But you just never know.
Guy that I'm not sure that we're buying low on because he's so decorated as a recruit, but Nick Harbor. That's the next one on my list from South Carolina. The run of wide receivers continues, though it really isn't fair to call a 240-pound guy just a true receiver. Just a little bit of a different body type than Jordan Watkins. Yeah. Bigger. This guy's bigger than Brock Bowers will.
Yeah.
Unlike Brock Bowers, Harbor did not play a single snap in line. So even though he looks like a tight end or a defensive end, he was treated like a true wide receiver, for better or for worse. I'll admit he's partially on this list just because I want to see this happen more so than I've seen it happen. Whereas you talk about, like, are they on this list because of vibes? Nick Harbor on this list for vibes. Okay. I'll sit here and say that. I have no problem with that. Before he ever played a game at South Carolina, he was number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freaks list. Okay.
Yeah.
That is hard to do. That is so unbelievably hard. Watching him run the 100, which he does in 10.22 seconds at 240 pounds, is wild. I mean, you see this guy and you're just like, this guy was built out of a lab. In that piece, that, the freaks list piece, Feldman quoted former South Carolina tight ends coach Jody Wright as saying, quote, I would say a taller Julio Jones with a Derrick Henry type build is a great comparison.
That set the kid up for failure, but take that down 15%, and I'm there. Like,
look, if you never catch a pass, if you get someone to say that on your behalf with a straight face, you've already won. All right? That's, to me, that is unbelievable. The difference, obviously, between Nick Harbor and those two SEC legends, Harbor, 13 career catches. So we'll pump the brakes on putting him in that sentence. I went back and I watched all of his catches from last year. It felt like everything that he was doing was coming back to the ball and not really utilizing anything that he does in stride. And we talk about how great that straight line speed is for somebody at his size. It kind of makes sense if you consider, like, yeah, teams have probably heard about that and they're giving him that space and he's coming back to the ball on comeback routes and curls and stuff like that. But Dowell Loggins needs to find ways to get him the ball with a head of steam and just getting him going downfield, because that's where we're really going to be able to see that absurd ability on display, where we're like, oh my God, they tried to cover him with an inside linebacker, and there's no way that this tough Borland cat is catching up to that guy running stride for stride. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Still learning the wide receiver position, but I'll bang the drum that he is not a bust. Okay. If you're giving him that label just because he didn't set the world on fire as a true freshman receiver in the SEC, go back and realize that very, very few receivers as true freshmen come into this conference and do just that. I don't like that he's a bit banged up in camp because he needs those reps, especially with a new starting quarterback, but I'm still a believer. I'm more so just hopeful that the vibe of Nick Harbor is a good one in 2024.
I think this is into the category of guy, and funny enough, the first guy I think of is Jadeveon Clowney, which is like, if you find a way to not make this guy into a game changer,
it's on you.
I'm looking at you funny. I'm looking at you funny. I mean, no matter how you slice it, I mean, this is a guy. I mean, you can see George Bush at the South Carolina games with binoculars looking for weapons of mass destruction because Nicholas out there. I mean, this guy is Nicholas. The Y always gets me. This guy's a little bit different.
Just call him Nick. It's easier. Yeah.
Yes. This guy's so different. Everything about him is so different. When you look at, we talked about, okay, well, here's Brock Bowers. Here's Oscar Delp. Here's Washington. Okay, now here's a guy who's bigger than Brock Bowers, okay, with track speed. Like, this is a guy that looks like, again, a missile coming down the field. He looks like if a car, you hit the gas pedal and he started running and the distance is just the difference. Like, hey, if you had 10 yards, he might push that car. And so point being, like, I think, what this guy has shown, and to your point, we're talking about South Carolina offense, that quarterback play was solid, right? But the offensive line, not too great. The receiver room, we're learning stuff. Like, I learned about Legette's voice the other day, just because, like, this guy is, they don't have, a lot of these guys at South Carolina aren't used exactly the way they probably should be. And I think that's not even now. That's going all the way back to the post-Spurrier era. They always will find these guys that are just, like, underrated South Carolina swamp monsters that are just amazing. But you look at this guy, though, his recruiting, right? It came down to Maryland, South Carolina, and also LSU. What that says to me is that, like, number one, okay, guy could want to stay next to home. Number two, he wasn't out there looking at Ohio State, Alabama, USC.
Want to play.
He was like,
I want to step in and play.
Yeah. And, like, that's my thing is that, it wasn't about necessarily, like, money. It wasn't necessarily about, like, some of the modern stuff. You talked about Jody Wright, tight ends coach. That guy's now, like, the head coach at Murray State. You know what I'm saying? He's gone. We have not heard any, despite the struggles at South Carolina, despite that coach leaving, we've not heard this guy walking into Beamer's office and going, give me $100,000. There's just something a little bit different about this guy. From the first time I saw him, if you guys want to see something, I mean, look his name up and then put track.
It's unbelievable. I'm not going to say it's like the Herschel track videos or the Bo Jackson track videos, but you're looking at this guy going, one of these things is not like the other. There is no way that this should be happening with a guy on this stage. You're just like, is he like CGI'd in or something? Like, what am I missing here?
Like, it's like society is going this way, and Nick Harbor is just silently, decisively going the other way, constantly. And that's the best way I could describe him. He's going to be a guy that, like, in a year or two, NFL guys are going to start. And this is a guy who has, like, 16K followers on Twitter? Yeah, this guy's 16K followers on Twitter. What is going on here? Something is not adding up. It is the fact that this dude built his body of work in the darkness, and he is just waiting to show it to you. And if South Carolina doesn't give him that opportunity, that's up to them. But it's there. And I'm just here to tell you right now, I don't care about, there's these little finite, route running, all this different stuff. Tell that guy to run straight.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am a believer you still need scheme with these guys that are crazy talented, but at the same time, you'd like to think that they can do enough.
Yeah.
Both Harbor and South Carolina can do enough for each other to make life easier on each other, if you get what I'm saying. There should be enough there to where you're not like, wait a minute, what do you mean he's lining up and blocking 25 times per game? That's not the way that he's supposed to be used. Like, let's get this guy going downhill. Let's get the ball in his hands, even if that means, dare I say, using him occasionally as more of a tight end, an inline guy, a slot guy. I would like to think that those opportunities are available. that is a major, major question because Lord knows the depth at the receiver position for South Carolina is a major, major question mark and could determine the ceiling of their team this year.
I'll say this too. His Twitter bio is just pass catcher. So like that's the thing. It's not like, oh, I'm a wide receiver. It's not this. And like this is a guy, this is the best way I could describe it. The way that Zion came out and it was like, oh my God, everybody knows this guy's name. This guy could be that. I mean, he could be that famous if he was at like Ohio State or Alabama and you saw him in the weight room and you saw what he was capable of doing in drills and in practice. And this film was getting leaked of this creature that they just had like back there doing whatever. There's something else to this. Like when we see him, he's going to be ready is the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, very much. Tennessee, Dylan Sampson, guy that I talked about before, big fan of his, the Tennessee running back who just fits so well into this offense. And I think that while he should have gotten more run, perhaps he didn't because of the pass protecting thing, whatever you want to chalk it up to, as we talked about with Adam Sparks a couple of months ago, he's going to get more run in this area, in this season. And I do believe that this is a guy that should step in and look, if he's not an upgrade, he's going to be close to it. I say that as somebody who really liked what Jalen Wright did last year, but his vision, his patience, his explosiveness, all of that stuff is there. They won that Kentucky game because of him. They really did. If you go back and look at the things that he did down the stretch, Kentucky could not slow him down. No matter what he did, if he was catching passes out of the backfield, if he was making a guy miss in space, whatever he was doing, it was just befuddling Kentucky in their place at night, hostile atmosphere when they were so desperate to get a stop, and he was just putting the game away. He's versatile. He can go in between the tackles. He's patient enough to be able to bounce it outside, but he doesn't necessarily default to that. He's just a really fun player, a very efficient player he was last year. He's in line for a big year in that offense. And even though, the hypo running backs haven't typically dominated volume in the way that, let's say, a Mizzou running back has, I still think that even if his efficiency falls off a bit, this guy should be a 1,000-yard rusher. This is somebody that could easily have double-digit touchdowns in that high-volume rushing offense. So I think many Tennessee fans would agree with me here. Just excited to see him get more work and to see him be the true lead back. Even though there are going to be other guys involved, definitely going to be the case. I think he is a true RB1 and could end up being one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in this conference by season's end.
Am I crazy for thinking that Kentucky-Tennessee was my favorite SEC game last year?
Yes, you are crazy. That game was fine. It was fine. It was a decent game. Best game in the SEC last year?
This is my favorite. I didn't say it was the best game.
Okay, favorite. Okay.
Yeah.
Go off.
That felt like, it was like an episode of Thrones or something. Like you had these guys and they were like adjustments. There were guys on both sides. You could see leading the troops. Talking about a guy from Kentucky earlier, Walker. We talked there were just so many people who made impacts on that game. And I think you're right there with Sam. It was just a chess match. It was a fun smash mouth game. That brings me to the point of Tennessee is another one of these offenses that has been different the last couple of years, right? We talked about it with Hooker downfield passing. Now we're getting into that last year, a little bit more of a defensive team, smash mouth. I'm so fascinated to see, what they're going to do with Nico and what their situation is going to be. I'm just going to call him Nico from now on. You've all heard me pronounce the name enough. It's not that I can't do it. But
you got it. You're good. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Will is your grandfathered out of having to say Iamaleava. Yeah, you're good.
Yep. So basically, I'm fascinated to see kind of where Nico's hot zones are, right? Because that's one of these things where, say what you will about Joe Milton, we knew who Joe Milton was pretty well. He's a final product, but there are guys that could be breakout stars. There are guys that could be not as in the limelight. But to your point, I think Sampson's a great answer because he's going to be there almost no matter what they are, and he's going to be part of what they're trying to build here. So I'm very interested, fascinated. We'll be tuning into Tennessee next year.
Yes, the dudes that you can name on the Tennessee offense, like we talk about with Ole Miss, there are a lot of them, and Sampson is for sure one of them. Texas, Anthony Hill Jr., the linebacker. He's on this list because, look, Texas fans know how good he is, but much like with Nick Anderson at Oklahoma, I am not sure that SEC fans are aware of how good this guy already is. And when it comes to those preseason all SEC ballots, there's going to be a lot of this, well, he hasn't really done it in the SEC, which is kind of funny if you think about it, because not only was he co-Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year, this guy was a really, really good player on a playoff team. It's one thing to be like a freshman linebacker who gets a ton of tackles on a bad defense, a la, I don't know, like a Henry To'o at Tennessee, kind of
Oh
those
man,
vibes.
that's a name. Yep, that's a good one for that one.
And look, I was of the belief Henry To'o was going to become an even better player in college, and I thought, he had his moments where it just did not click for him. But this is a middle linebacker who was a true freshman who got 59 snaps in a playoff game. That is hard to do. Really, really hard to do. That's how much our guy PK trusts him. Yes, it's PK. We're sticking with that nickname. Was really more of like an obvious passing down guy in that Bama game in week 2 of his college career. Still ends up making huge plays in that game. He had 2 sacks. In that game, Bama is down 34-24 with 8 minutes left. It's 3rd and 10. Hill actually lines up as an edge rusher, and you can tell that his goal is just strictly do not let Jalen Milroe break contain. Whatever you do, do not let him get going to the right side. Just even if it means you're not beating your guy necessarily to the spot, do not over pursue and just make sure that you are that wall on the outside. So he's sort of sitting there. And then the second that Milroe steps up in the pocket, it's like, boom, Hill just takes him down. And it's Texas's biggest defensive play in that game. It ends up being Bama's last offensive play of the night. I mean, that's isn't that wild with like 8 minutes left and then Texas bleeds the clock? Like, it was because you made that play, and you made that play where you did as well, deep in Bama territory. Couldn't even be like, hey, we're going to go for it. Bama had to punt in that spot. It's hard to teach those types of instincts. Anthony Hill Jr. already has that. He only started 6 games last year, but once those instincts were evident, he could be trusted to make plays, which is why he ends up with 67 tackles. He had the ATFLs, 5 sacks. Not just on his heels, he attacks. He's now the face of that defense with Sweat and Murphy off to the NFL. Number 0. Going to introduce himself to a whole lot of people in the SEC. He had 99 pass rush snaps, which is kind of a lot for an inside linebacker who didn't even start until the midseason, but that number should climb, especially in the event that, could be a little bit tougher for that defensive line to get home. Hill could be the best defensive player on a national championship team. That is not really out of the realm of possibility. That is very much on the table for him. Not typically the way that we talk about an all bang the drum team type guy, but for the conference switch and that adjustment of like a new fan base, a new group of fans learning who he is, I think it still works. And I probably will still find myself singing his praises on a lot of different places in the preseason.
Yeah, it's interesting because you were talking about like, well, they got to do it in the SEC, and like you then went to, okay, well, they're playoff team, and my mind was like, man, they got cooked Alabama, at least for that series that you were talking about. And I mean, it just goes to show how special that is. Just to compare, this is just a fair comparison. The most recent linebacker we've seen like that as a freshman, Harold Perkins, right? And the thing they always said was, this is a guy that could get to the quarterback, that could pressure, but kind of the other stuff's not exactly there. Yeah, right, as a freshman. And it's linebacker, I think, maybe even more so than quarterback, is hard to break onto the field as a freshman.
I think there's just so much going on, like to process, especially as like an inside linebacker. When I agree with you 100%. I think linebacker and tight end are like those two positions where you just have so many different areas. It's one thing to be like, oh, I'm going to play slot corner. I'm not saying slot corner is easy or anything like that, but like to play slot corner or something like that, or even if you're like a right guard, yeah, you got to go through the strength and conditioning program. But still, like, you've got a little bit more help on your side. Whereas, like, if you mess up in that spot, everybody's going to know about it. And you're just on such an island at times at that position as a true freshman.
Yeah, I think you highlighted kind of all that stuff. And it's the reason why I would actually kind of put that above quarterback, is because quarterback, you're on your own cadence. So if you don't snap the ball, you get a penalty, but that ball's not coming out. If you're a linebacker, number one, you're on the other team's cadence. But number two, you got your coaches. You got a D tackle in front of you who's a fifth-year senior who's like, what's this guy doing? What's our play? Like, what? I don't think this is smart. And then you have guys looking down. Everyone's just looking at you like, what do we do? But also we're doing our own thing. And so to break onto a solid, like an old Texas team that was changing the narrative with all these great coaches to make an impact so early against Alabama, to play as much as he did, not just like, as a, like, because like I said, I mean, Harold Perkins was the best pass rusher you've ever seen. I'm definitely not saying that in a negative light, but to say, we'll play you regularly and trust you in these spots to be a spy, which Harold Perkins was not trusted with against Jalen Milroe last year. I was waiting on that joke to come.
Yep.
But yes, it's a really big responsibility is where I'm going with that, to say, okay, you're going to be you're going to be the guy here. And you're young, but we trust you. And you have so much going on, but we trust you to stop Jalen Milroe, which in itself is hard, right? Just to do it. If if you told me Jalen Milroe is going to be in the A gap, you need to be there and stop him. I'm just not sure I could do that. I'm a pretty big guy. And so to figure out where he's going to be, to trust yourself, to do all that, I just think that for a linebacker, when you show that total realm of skills on such a good team, it's really a big deal.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was kind of what gave him confidence early, if that's what got him engaged and feeling like, oh, I actually can do this. But it surely didn't hurt him. I mean, it definitely didn't. Just ended up being such a valuable player for a team that went places and that did really, really good things. Bigger than Perkins too. Definitely a different player, a more prototypical inside linebacker. I want to say he's like somewhere between 230 and 240 that he was clocking in at last year. So that definitely helps, in terms of the run fits and stuff like that, being able to step in and do that. But somebody that, look, once Texas becomes mainstream SEC culture, Anthony Hill Jr., guy like that, very much will be part of it. Texas A&M. Nick Scorton, the defensive lineman. This man is 19 years old and already led a Core 4 conference in sacks. Let me repeat that. Yes, this man is 19 years old and already led a Core 4 conference in sacks. The Purdue transfer, yes, led the Big Ten in sacks last year.
That's sophomore. The part of it that wasn't making the 19 years old. I was like, why doesn't this? Wow. He played a lot older than that. Okay.
Does not turn 20 until August. Pretty crazy. Wow. Yes. Yeah. Very, very young. Now he gets to play for Mike Elko. He will be, I think, widely overlooked on these preseason all SEC teams because if you haven't done it in the SEC, have you really done it? Again, that's the conversation. But he's a stud. I mean, really, really good. 15 TFLs, 10 sacks, and was a captain, again, as a 19-year-old guy last year. That is really impressive. Returning back to his home state of Texas, where he wasn't very highly recruited coming out. I'm not sure how much of this was NIL. Everybody connects the dots when an established player ends up going to A&M. That's just kind of natural. I don't know how much of it was scheme. Maybe he didn't want to play in coverage as much as he did at Purdue and the Ryan Walters defense. Maybe he's thinking more about his NFL fit. Maybe he wanted to play for Mike Elko, who we know has developed likes of DeMarvin Leal, Justin Madubuike, these great guys on the defensive line. Probably some tampering. Probably. Okay? And
if you're not tampering, you're not trying, at this point.
If I'm an A&M fan, I'm like, this is the guy I want to tamper for. Like, you kidding me?
Catch me on this. Cool.
Yeah, seriously. I don't care. But whatever the case, he's playing for A&M. 280-pound edge guy who also defends the run really, really well. He's going to have a lot of NFL eyes on him, even heading into the season. I think he's going to be in those early mock drafts, even if he's not getting the love within the SEC as kind of a newcomer. I think a lot of NFL people will be very keen on him. Just a very, very big get for Mike Elko, trying to reestablish his defense in year one in College Station.
Yeah, I think that A&M is kind of an interesting place because we talked about this at the time is how much of how low could their floor really be, right? Because you had Jimbo and you're lost these guys, I don't know, but you still have Wigman, you still have Evan Stewart, and those are two guys. There's quarterback Evan Stewart's probably got enough buzz to where he's not really a bang the drum guy. This is why I do love this addition because to your point,
Evan Stewart's gone. Remember that?
Oh, you're right.
He's off to Oregon. Yes.
Yeah. So I told you there was going to be a guy I forgot about. I was like, I knew there were too many guys. Yep. And so, it's the point being, they have all these recruits on the roster. It's basically what's going. That was just an example of that point. And so where I'm going there is it's tough. When a coach leaves, when a program gets flipped like that, you go, okay, what do we have left? Right. And sometimes this new kind of generation gets swept under the rug. If it's not, hey, funny enough, Evan Stewart's a great example. Guy that was a big name guy, that's all over the headlines. But to your point, it's we don't exactly know what the full bio is here. We as SEC fans, it's an unknown commodity that subconsciously there are more interesting Texas A&M storylines. We talk about the coaching, we talk about stuff like that. So I actually love where you're coming from here, which is that because of a little bit of that remaining talent, because of, and we did this breakdown when it happened. There's still 5 stars on the roster. There's still, and when that happens, you tend to have a little bit of a good line play. It's not one guy out there fighting, like Jon Snow with his sword. So point being, the opportunity is still there. And that's exactly why they were able to recruit this guy, talking about Elko and the great things he can do on defense. So although, they could in theory take a step backwards, the scheme, I think on both sides, Robert Patrick, not going to say his scheme was failing, but it was more of like a personnel / turmoil in general. But I think on both sides of the ball, they're going to be schematically a little bit better this year. And for that reason, guys like that aren't going to be asked to be a one-man team in a way that, like, if he had gone to Auburn, it would have been like, all right, dude, like, what do you want? Like, you're going to play whatever. Like here, it's like, no, like we can put you where you can succeed. And that is the pitch that got him there. So yeah, I love that for him. I love the situation, and I'm excited to see his name at. It's interesting. Who do you think they'll send to media days?
Oh, that's
other than like Wigman's a lock.
Yeah, Wigman's a lock. Bryce Foster probably.
Mm-hmm.
Center who's coming back. I don't. They could send somebody like Scourton. I mean, if you're a captain at your previous place as an underclassman, and I don't know how that could have also been a little bit of the sell with the new coaching staff of like, hey, we'll make you a captain. We're gonna build this defense around you. We're gonna really make sure that we're gonna boost your NFL draft stock as a sophomore because you did promising things as a freshman. I don't know how much of that was involved with those conversations. Wouldn't surprise me. But if they sent somebody like him as well, yeah, that could be the 3 right there.
Yeah, and that's like more or less where I'm going, which is that like despite all this other stuff, this guy ends up being a leader because he was a captain at Purdue, like you were talking about. So it's like, yeah, like this is a guy that's going to be introduced to the world probably through more of an off the field thing early. But then when you see him play and when you watch his highlights, when you watch Purdue play, as up and down as it's been, there was a little bit of a constant there. And hearing about his age, hearing about what he's brought, I'm fascinated to see what he does at A&M.
Let's end with this one, Will. We have to end with Vandy. I always hate ending with Vandy. It's just the way that the works.
Alphabetical order, man.
I know. It bites us at the worst possible time. Let's end with Cedric Alexander, the running back.
Yep.
This is the pickings are slim. You cannot do a dude off with Vandy. It just does not work. The main reason I went with Alexander is because he was responsible for probably the coolest play that Vandy had all of last year, which was hurdling a guy against Alabama A&M. That's it. That's what we're talking about here. And look, this guy is going to be put in some tough spots because that offensive line is going to be at a disadvantage week in, week out. The numbers are not going to reflect how good of a player he is. I will bang the drum that he is much better than his offensive line will suggest that he is and what those final numbers suggest that he is. Mm-hmm. Just say a prayer for Alexander. Say a prayer for Vandy in whatever way that you feel necessary to do that. It's going to be bad. It's going to be so, so bad. Well, the portal just gobbled this program up in every possible way. And it's not looking good for Clark Lee. I was looking at the roster again today, just trying to find my guy. Last year, I at least had CJ Taylor. CJ Taylor is a fun player.
Yeah.
And could do a lot of different things and had to do a lot of different things for that defense. Just say a prayer. That's all I can ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is that the portal has hit Vandy in a very different way. I think that might – I'm not blaming this person for this, but that might be a little bit of the downside of Clark Lee, which is he's such a hard-nosed coach that if you have opportunity to leave, it's not like he's this big players coach that it's like, oh, there's snacks, come stay, please. He strikes me as like a little bit of a, okay, do your job, I don't want to hear it type of guy. And so point being – we've seen time and time again these players that will rise up and be successful at Vandy, and then they will just be out the door. So it's hard to really predict that because you very rarely see these guys stay for multiple years. And that's one thing that I will say is that Vandy, during like the Derek Mason years, had quarterback consistency. Like, say what you will about them, but they had 3 and 4 year quarterbacks that were like leading, like, they had that, and that's why they're able to get up into that 6 and 7 wins, right? Because it was like, okay, whatever our roster is, they're here to play school. We kind of have what we do here. And now we've gotten to a point where if you're a good player at Vandy and other programs will take you, we've seen it time and time and time again. The tackle went to Alabama, the receiver this past year.
London Humphreys went to Georgia. Yeah.
Yep. Our boy Ray Davis. Like, that's the thing is Ray that Davis, like these guys. it's every year now that there's 2 or 3 impact players leaving Vanderbilt, where these guys used to stay and at least keep them above sea level and make them a fun watch. Now it's almost like, to your point, it's becoming a feeder program in the SEC, which is tough because, as you say, you look up and down the roster, it's like, who am I excited about? Because you could always find a guy. I think now we've gotten to kind of where it's like, let's try to be optimistic here.
They brought in Nate Johnson from Utah. He had some moments against Florida, and then he lost his job to a pig farmer. But yeah.
Come on, man.
Sorry.
Not the pig farmer.
Not the pig farmer. Hey, I'm a Bryson Barnes fan through and through. Yeah. But Cam Rising coming back for his 50th year of college is something I'm greatly looking forward to.
Yeah.
AARP as soon as he finishes his college career. All right. That'll do it. All-Band the Drum Team. Lock it in. Official. Let's end with the jersey contest, Will. I told you I'd have a story. This is my last one for the jersey contest. It is my best one. I have saved the best for last. This is not Charles Barkley. This is Jason Kidd. We have a throwback Suns jersey from the 90s, the best uniform that they have ever had. They've kind of gone back to a little bit more so. Jason Kidd, good old number 32. This was before he was traded to the Nets. Jason Kidd was one of those guys that I liked because my brother did. 100%. My brother was like, I'm a big Jason Kidd fan. So I said at that age, I'm going to become a big Jason Kidd fan. Why I decided to follow him on that and not other players, I don't know. But I just decided one day that I also like Jason Kidd. My grandparents used to go spend basically all of winter in Arizona. And so I think my mom asked them one year, hey, could you come back with a couple of Jason Kidd jerseys? That would be awesome. And then they did. And I was like 9 years old, I want to say, at the time. And this jersey still fits me 25 years later, which is just incredible because for whatever reason, when I was a kid, I did not understand what a medium-sized jersey was. I was, let's get a large. I want to grow into it. I don't want to get anything that's going to fit me then. I want to get things that are going to fit me for a very long time. Will,
my guy, you are my favorite person because you are consistent in that way. It's like, one thing about you is you're like, because look who's reaping the benefits now. Grown father Conor O'Gara from that decision that 9-year-old Conor made.
I'm not sure how much of a hand I had in the size of those jerseys way back when of this specific jersey, but like definitely when I got like my Charles Woodson, my Tracy McGrady, my Zach Thomas, like those jerseys, I was like, yeah, I want to get a big and baggy for sure. This jersey has been worn to many tailgates, many days at the beach. It is as good of a tank as I have in my entire wardrobe. And the best part is because these old champion jerseys that they used to have, these replica jerseys that were so much better than the Reebok replicas, like infinitely better. The nice thing is that I used to just be able to like I can throw these on and it can get sandy or whatever, and it's no big deal. And it's perfectly fine. And that is what I absolutely love about this jersey. It looks, because of the Suns logo, it looks like I am rooting for the Sun as well when I go to the beach. So that's a positive as well. I fit in perfectly. Jason Kidd Suns jersey will never leave my closet. Ever, 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 ever. Lauren knows it. She will never ask me to get rid of that jersey because, quite frankly, I just still get too much use out of it.
Yeah, that's an all-time jersey. Like that's sick. It's not quite. This is everything we look for in a jersey. It has a purpose, like you said. You break it out regularly. It's not quite. There are some jerseys that break this rule where it's like, oh, you got like a mellow, or it's a popular jersey. But this is like just under that radar. It's not quite Steve Nash. It's not Charles Barkley, but it's like a cool like. I mean, he played in Phoenix longer than I remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like I said, 5.5 seasons. So yeah, I mean, and it's actually kind of crazy too. This is a little bit of editorializing about not Coach Jason Kidd. He was Mr. Triple Double like back in the day, and I imagined him as this huge, imposing 6'5", 6'6" being. No, he was 6'4", but for point guards at that time, massive, and he played way bigger than he was. He was super fun to watch. Like you said, he was the engine. Early for Phoenix, well, early for Dallas, but then Phoenix and the Nets is where he really put it all together and was kind of that run and gun centerless matchup that made the finals. So yeah, I think he's a super duper fun NBA player. I think that I'm not going to say he's underrated because he's a Hall of Famer. We don't like to do that, but I think the greatest point guard conversation, he at least deserves to be kind of like a footnote or mentioned in that because of the way he played the game that no one else was. So it's hard to get a jersey that flies under the radar that's that good of a player, that's that recognizable,
won a title too with the Mavs.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that Dirk team. What was that? Yeah, the team that beat the Heat in 2010. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, great legacy. Plays touch problematic. Touch problematic. If you don't need to Google too much into that one. But I don't have to answer those questions when I go to the beach. It's not wearing a Michael Vick jersey like circa 2009 or something like that. So we're good. It still plays. It's perfectly fine. But yeah, this is my favorite one in my closet. And as we talk about jerseys and having use, I actually do get use out of this because I live in Florida and can go to the beach and can go, when we go kayaking or something like that, throw this on. It's it's a tank and it's good to go. So yes, love me my throwback Jason Kidd Suns jersey. That's why I wanted to end with this one. You have one more. You got one more. Did you save your best for last?
I think that okay. So the Festus might have been my best. However, I do have some more fire coming.
Okay. All right. One more. I'll have the poll out. Hopefully by the time that people are listening to this for the previous one, and then we'll have one more round of 2 to be able to close things out. And eventually we're going to be able to settle on the best jersey. Hope everybody is enjoying NCAA tournaments. Hopefully if you're listening to this on Friday morning, we're in it. We're in it. Just enjoy, sit back and relax 4 days of basketball. It's absolutely awesome. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. That is Saturday Down South on YouTube. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.